Hello, welcome back to EDH on a Budget. I'm your host, Iceman, and today we're going to be going over 4 different finisher cards. I'm using TCG Player to go over the cards' prices, and most of all these cards are going to be under $2. First up, we have Sir Conrad the Grim. This is a legendary creature human knight that costs about 65 cents. Its mana cost is 3 black, and its stats are 5/4, which are pretty decent. And it says whenever another creature dies or creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent, and it has pay 1 and a black each player mills a card. So this is definitely going to finish many games. Black has many great finishers, especially on a budget. The reason this is so good is because it will hit each opponent. It is not dealing combat damage to do that. It's not easy to stop this, because once if you go with the mill aspect, any creature card going into anybody's graveyard is gonna, including yours, is gonna deal 1 damage to everybody. So it kind of feeds itself if you have the right setup where you're milling cards. And even if not, if you have a bunch of tokens on the battlefield, those would be creatures dying under most destroy all board wipes or sacrifice outlets. When you pay the 2 to mill, each player mills the cards. There's typically 4 players at a table. Your odds are pretty decent that you're going to hit 1 or 2 creatures among that, especially if you stack your deck right. There's several cards that can return creature cards to the top of your deck. So this is definitely a card you're not going to want out in like mid-game or as soon as you can. You're going to want to set up and then play this to finish everybody. Especially because I think most people are going to know that this is to finish the game, and they're not going to want to leave it there. Next up, we have Rise and Shine. This is a sorcery that costs 18 cents. Its mana cost is 1 and a blue, and it says target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4 +1/+1 counters on each artifact that became a creature this way. And then for Overload, 4 blue, you may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change this text by replacing all instances of target with each. So this is a blue win con that is going to focus on having a mass amount of artifact non-creature. So typically it's going to be tokens, bloods, clues, junks, treasures. They just keep making more and more and more, and that's great for this strategy. Blue has so many ways to do that, but this also will work with your mana rocks. I would imagine for a deck like this, you're going to want as many mana rocks as you can for your ramp, especially at the 2 mana range, so you can get to this a lot faster. 4 +1/+1 counters is really strong. And most people are not going to have too many blockers because your board is going to look non-threatening. They're not going to see many creatures, so they're not going to be like, oh, I need to save up a lot of blockers. So when you turn all your artifacts into creatures, as long as they were already on the battlefield, they also have haste, and that is kind of the surprise aspect of this. It's a great card. I've definitely used it to finish games. And if you're at a table where you see somebody just making obscenely large tokens of artifacts, like I had a clue deck and I was making just 10, 12, 15, 20 clues, and that's what you got to be thinking for their win con. At least what I would be worried about. Next up, we have Masterful Replication for 12 cents. This is a kind of an expensive instant, 5 and a blue, but most win cons are about 6 to 10 mana. And the 2 options you can choose from are create 2 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens. You're going to have to be really desperate if you're choosing that one, I think. The second mode is choose target artifact you control. Each other artifact you control becomes a copy of that artifact until end of turn. So yes, you need to control the artifact, but since you're building the deck and you're putting this in there, you're going to have artifacts that you want. It doesn't necessarily have to be a creature, but if you're trying to win the game, I would imagine most of the time that's what you want. And you do want lots of artifacts in general for this deck, because each one is going to become a copy of said creature. There's many artifact creatures that have attack triggers, combat damage, or just are big, beefy, strong attack power creatures. And this is a great way to turn, again, all those artifact tokens and mana rocks into that big threatening creature that is going to finish the game very quickly. I think the the most fun way to use this card would be on Blade Griff prototype. I think that would be very chaotic and most likely lead to you winning the game, because the opponents wouldn't have much of anything left. That was actually one of my budget picks in a different video. Next up, we have Itic of Mogus, which is 27 cents. This is a creature Minotaur Shaman. The mana cost is 3 and a red. Its stats are 4/2, and it says whenever Itic of Mogus enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to your devotion to red to each opponent. So there's a lot of ways to abuse this in red, and I think people just kind of overlook this. Red has many ways to make copies of creatures, whether it's an ETB copy or you're just casting instants and sorceries that make copies of a creature, or even Rihanna Fire Dancer. That's another great way to make copies. And that is exactly what you want with this, because it doesn't have a lot of pips on its own. It only has 1 pip of red devotion, so ideally you are going to want to be having a mostly red deck, and possibly even more of a red permanent deck, because while Faithless Looting, for instance, has a red pip in it, it is not a permanent, so there will be no devotion added by playing that. So by having cards that have 2 or 3 red pips in it, it really will add up much faster. And the nice part is this deals damage to each opponent. So it goes a lot faster this way when it says each opponent. And next up is a win con I think most people have not heard of before. It's Mordor on the March. This is from the Lord of the Rings set. It's a sorcery that costs 16 cents. It says exile target creature card from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it. It gains haste until end of turn. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. And lastly, it has Storm. When you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. So it doesn't say each spell you cast before it this turn. So if an opponent is casting spells on your turn, this will add to the Storm count. And it is very easy in red and black to get big, huge creatures into the graveyard. You do not need to cast an 8 mana, 10 mana creature, wait for it to die, and then bring it back with this. With reds, many draw, discard, and discard draw, also known as rummaging and looting effects. You can get those creatures into your graveyard very easily, and then those types of effects are so cheap, you very well likely could play that spell that rummages or loots, and then play this one. I do think if you're playing this, you're going to want a few cards on the stack, so, or not on the stack, but I've cast a few, so it's going to be good to have some cards that kind of cycle themselves away, also called cantrips that draw and discard. Draw and discard's nice because you don't lose your hand size that way, and the giving the creatures haste is really what's going to make this a surprise win con. You do not want to bring them back and say, okay, your turn, and just hope nobody has removal and nobody has a board wipe. With this, you're going to be bringing the threats out and closing the game in the same turn, which is what I like. I would definitely not play this for only one spell. You're going to want to get several copies with the storm ability. Red does have some ways to copy spells also, which would get pretty nuts if you started copying this spell that has storm and then the spell you copied has storm. So as you can see, it can get very nuts very quickly. And if you like what you see on this channel, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Thanks for watching.